Have you ever frozen in the key moment of making a critical decision? Whether it's in business or in life, it can cost you everything. Commander's Intent will teach and inspire you how to lead with clarity, courage, and purpose. So here's your host, retired Air Force Colonel, fighter pilot, and your leadership mentor, Derek Oaks.
Hello, I'm Derek Oaks, and welcome to Commander's Intent. I've got as my guest today, Bart Marcois, and I'll let him give an introduction of who he is and why his conversation is relevant in what we're talking about here today. As a reminder, we don't talk politics here, we talk decision making. We talk about Commander's Intent and what was the organizational leader trying to do, and were they successful at it? And I think the topic today will be interesting to a lot of folks who are probably over 30 who remember this happening. We're going to talk about why we invaded Iraq in 2003. What was the Bush administration's intent? Why was it so important? And were they successful? And so I want to start by just, Bart, for relevance, just talk us through a little bit of your career and what you did during that time period in 2003 that led up to the invasion that gave you an inside track on the decision making.
Sure. Thanks. It's good to be here with you, Derek. Always good to be with you. So I was a Foreign Service officer, a professional diplomat. Started in the 1980s under President Reagan, worked for Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and then resigned. Took early retirement, took another job. When I joined the Foreign Service, they told me that they would give me language training, and they gave us a list of about 30 or 40 countries we could choose from. And when I heard they would pay for books, tuition, and per diem, I said, "What's the hardest language you got?" And they said, "We can have Chinese or Arabic." And there were about 6 people who wanted Chinese, and nobody wanted Arabic. And I said, "I'll try Arabic. Been a Zionist all my life. Let me see what the other side thinks and get to understand them." And so I worked in Jordan, Tunisia, Yemen, and Kuwait. And we're talking 1991, right? August 2nd, 1991. I was in Jordan. I was just leaving Jordan when the invasion took place.
Actually, it happened 1990, was it not?
Yeah. 1990.
Yeah, because then
1990.
We attacked in 91.
Yeah, 1990. It was 1990, sorry. So then I spent 10 years, and then after I got out, I worked for a little while on the outside, and then I went back in as a political appointee under George W. Bush, and I was a principal deputy assistant secretary over at the Energy Department, looking over international affairs. So I had a bird's eye view of both invasions from the inside and of the history of it all, especially because I was not an intelligence officer, but I was an avid consumer of intelligence. And when I was a principal DAS, I had a daily briefer, and I could task him with finding out things. So I saw the intelligence world from a completely different point of view, from the point of view of the people who were saying, "Tell me more about this and find out more about that." So that's my background. That's what I bring to this.
Gotcha. And something that I don't think a lot of people understand is that we think, or I would say your average American thinks that nuclear weapons or the whole nuclear program in the United States is managed by the Department of Defense or Department of War now. That's not the case.
It's not.
Yeah, going all the way back to World War II and the Manhattan Project, it was the Department of Energy. And they still do. You go out to the ranges in Nevada and a lot of other locations, and it's Department of Energy.
New Mexico, it's the National Nuclear Security Administration, which is separated at the neck from the rest of the Department of Energy. But the Undersecretary of Energy for NNSA serves under the direction of the Secretary of Energy. So I was in the other energy department. I was not in the NNSA part, but I had a Q clearance, which is a top secret clearance that has nuclear clearance. It's above and beyond and separate from your usual top secret, above top secret clearances.
Gotcha.
Which I had all of those, the SITK and the code word in HUMINT and what have you.
So the bottom line is you were seeing the intel as it came in that time frame, 2002, 2003.
I was.
And you go back to the 80s when the Iran-Iraq war and Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons on the Iranians.
And on his own people.
Yeah.
On the Kurds, on anyone who supported the Kurds.
Yeah. That tells a lot about what we thought of his mindset and his willingness to do terrible things. And I think that informed the decisions that we made later on.
We knew every military commander, at least every infantry commander, is familiar with the work of Marine. He was a Marine first lieutenant. He started as second lieutenant in Vietnam, worked his way up through the ranks, and he wrote a book about there are some people, you have to know your soldiers. There are some who absolutely will not pull the trigger. And you want to make sure that the ones who will pull the trigger have a rifle. The same thing can be said of a lot of world leaders and military dictators. There are some who will talk a lot about waging mass wars of mass destruction, but very few who will actually do it. We knew that Saddam Hussein had done it. He had not hesitated to do it. He did it repeatedly. He did it against the Iranians. He did it against the masses of young boys that the Iranians had conscripted and forced onto the front lines. He gassed them just terribly and used terrible chemical weapons against them. And he used it against the Kurds, and he liked it. He used it against people, individuals, if they had displeased him particularly. So we knew that he had chemical weapons. We knew he had used them, and we knew he had threatened to use them, and that if he could...
We were convinced that he had the means, and we knew he had the will to use them. And going back to that conflict, 90, 91, that was when I was just getting into the military, and I did not fight in Desert Storm. I got in right after that. I spent time going back and forth, and a lot of my friends, a lot of my peers spent a lot of the 90s in the Middle East, in Tehran and Invade and a lot of other places over there, watching Saddam Hussein. And every time that he sneezed and every time he got excited and every time that his rhetoric was inflammatory, we'd send more forces over there. I know that from a military perspective, it was draining the force. We used to say that SWA is killing us. The SWA is killing the military because we're sending our forces over there for no real fight, but in a deterrent capacity. And a lot of it had to do with Saddam and how he spoke to us and how he spoke to the international community about his willingness to use weapons he had already used.
Mm-hmm.
You take that setting and then you fast forward, George W. becomes president in 2000, and then September 11th happens. And now I think we're looking around at actors of, okay, we've let this go on for a long time. We knew about Osama bin Laden. We knew of quite a few of these terrorist actors and what they were capable, what they spoke of doing. Now Osama bin Laden had actually acted on it with the September 11th attacks. Where else did we need to be concerned? I think they started looking at Saddam Hussein of, we need to do something about this.
Let me go back to the 90s briefly, because it's important to understand this as the foundation of what happened in the 2000s. After Bush 41, George H.W. Bush defeated Saddam Hussein in 100 hours. He wanted to show he was doing the decent thing. We could have absolutely massacred 50,000 Iraqi soldiers in a few days. It's not in our nature. We're not like that. He didn't think that the juice was worth the squeeze to go into Baghdad and get Saddam Hussein and capture him and put him on trial or kill him in the attempt. That would have drained our resources and made the war go on for possibly months, and we had no idea. And again, we had the belief that he would use chemical weapons against our troops, and he didn't want to do it. He had this quick victory, and he said, okay, we're having a ceasefire, and you, Saddam, can stay there. Saddam Hussein took that mercy that's characteristic of Americans, and he started jeering at Bush and at Thatcher, especially once they lost their elections, he would go on TV and he'd say, Bush, where's Bush? Thatcher, where's Thatcher? They're gone, but I'm still here. And that was a message to the other Arabs. I am not done with you, and you are not done with me. I was in Yemen in the 90s, and the Yemenis treated us like we were from a weak, poor country because they thought that Saddam Hussein won the war. What they saw was not that we had defeated them and walked away in mercy. They saw that we left before the job was done. And later in the 90s, when I was in Kuwait, the Kuwaitis would come to me and say, why? Why did he leave him there? We don't understand that. And Iran was telling everybody, you see, this is a conspiracy. The Americans are using Saddam Hussein as leverage, as a threat to force the Kuwaitis and the Saudis to give them cheap oil. The whole thing is a conspiracy. And Arabs are very conspiratorially minded. They will never, they're like Eastern Europeans and Central Europeans. They will never accept an explanation at face value. They always want to see the backstory. They're sure there's a backstory there. And they'll take the conspiracy over the Occam's razor, the simplest explanation. And so this was weighing down on us diplomatically. Now go to 1994. Since the victory over Saddam, we had either combined exercise in Kuwait, or we had a carrier group in the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea. And they never were, there was always an overlap of a couple of days. Bill Clinton was cutting military spending, and he said, our carrier task forces are stretched. We could probably leave a gap of 4 weeks or 5 weeks between the end of the exercise. I can't believe I've forgotten the name of it. And then within days of that announcement, Saddam Hussein started moving forces south toward the border with Kuwait. And he started moving more and more heavy equipment transporters. And it looked the way it had looked back in 1990. And this was October of 94. All the expats sent their wives and daughters out of the country because we thought we were going to be invaded. And there was a massive inpouring of American troops and planes for almost a week there, probably 4 days, 5 days. The question I was being asked by every international correspondent was, how many American military personnel are on the ground in Kuwait? And I would give the same answer. There was usually about 3,000, and then it increased day after day. There are 3,000, there are 6,000, there are 8,000, either on the ground or on the way. That was just a whisker short of a lie, because the real answer was 87. There were 87 American personnel there. They were the caretakers at Camp Doha. They were the Office of Military Cooperation guys, and 3 guys from the Defense Attaché's office. That was it. Had we confirmed that we only had 87 military people there, it would have come across the border. But until that wing of 8 arrived, we were defenseless against Iraqi tanks. We had nobody that could drive them, pre-positioned in Camp Doha, but there were no crews there that could put them into operation. So at the end of that, we all heaved a big sigh of relief. It went on for about a month. We had a presidential visit, SecDef state visit, and we heaved a great sigh of relief. And I remember the ambassador gathering us together and saying, what just happened can never happen again. The cost was $1.5 billion over the course of 3.5 weeks. We can't do that. And Saddam knew that. He had great intelligence. He had great penetration into our force. And he knew that all he had to do was rattle his cage just a little bit, and he could cost us $500 million or $1 billion. And he saw that, what you're talking about, the Southwest Asia fatigue, he saw that and he was pushing that. And so by the time George W. Bush came in, he came in with this attitude that, okay, we have to do something about this. One of his big criticisms of Bill Clinton was that Clinton had been indecisive, and he was the decider. You remember?
Yeah.
I'm the decider. I am a decisive president. So that setting the stage, enter Bush, And come 9/11.
Yeah. And I was a captain at the time, so I was fairly young in the Air Force, come up on about 10 years almost. And I looked at it and said, something has to change. We have to fish or cut bait. We have to, because this is draining the force. And so, me seeing at the captain level, I'm sure it was much worse at the general officer level and the bean counters who were actually looking at the expenditures and what it was doing to our equipment and to our personnel and the turnover and the lost training time. You're not sharpening the saw. You're not getting better at your job. And so the military was starting to squawk at the general officer level saying we need to do something. And so in comes President W. Bush, and he heard that, and he heard that loud and clear. But I didn't get the feeling like there was definitive movement until after 9/11.
There was another group that was squawking, and those were the families of the guys that had to constantly be deployed. People don't think, a lot of the people deploying for those exercises were reservists and National Guardsmen, and they had to leave their place of employment for 90 days and be in Kuwait for 90 days, living on Camp Doha. The rules were very strict, very little interaction with the local population, and couldn't drink. You could not drink in the country. I'm not a drinker. It wasn't an issue for me. That was a big issue for a lot of people. They weren't drunkards, but
They had a lifestyle.
they wanted to have a beer
They wanted a beer after dinner.
after work. They want to have a glass of wine with their dinner once in a while. Couldn't have it for 3 months. And there were a lot of divorces that happened. And every company commander is looking at this. Every unit commander is looking at as he counsels his men, he's looking at the price they're paying, the toll that the wives and the children were paying for these guys being deployed over there, or in some cases, the husbands and children for the women being deployed over there. The human cost. And President Bush came in with an information tentacles deeply embedded within the military, and he was very aware of this. So again, that brings us to 9/11 being the catalyst.
Yeah, I remember. I think everybody who's alive, who was an adult at that time, remembers 9/11. I was awakening my billeting room in Korea. I was in Korea for a year. I'd been there about 2 months, and somebody calls me. They get a call, so September 12th, because they're ahead. And they say, hey, turn on your TV. A plane just hit one of the Twin Towers. And so I watched it, and I'm sure everybody who had access to it watched it. And I knew something dramatic was about to change. I knew that the first 10 years of my military life had been relatively calm compared to what was coming. And I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew that something was going to change. And that was felt across the world. And so then that takes us into President Bush. We go into Afghanistan, and a lot of my friends were on the initial invasion of Afghanistan, and that went very well as we worked with the Northern Alliance and some allies to curb the power of the Taliban and then eventually topple the Taliban. Many in the Bush started looking around and going, okay, now why don't we look at finishing the job in Iraq? Or do we need to do anything in Iraq? Now we have a full-on conflict with much of the Arab world, or at least the negative elements of the Arab world, and this guy is a continuous thorn in our side. Do we have to do anything about it, and what do we have to do? So I'll turn to you on what that conversation looked like.
We did not know the true identity of the attackers for another year and a half. We knew a couple of them, and anytime you saw a Kuwaiti passport on a terrorist after the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait, you had to be suspicious. Is this guy really a Kuwaiti? Or is this a false identity created by the Iraqis when they were in charge of the government of Kuwait? Because they created thousands of false identities for people. It was a huge issue. And because I was so intimately involved with Kuwait, in the interim between when I was a career Foreign Service officer and when I went back in as a political, I was an advisor to the government of Kuwait here in Washington. And so anything that remotely touched Kuwait with a bit of controversy, I had to dive into and prepare essentially what came out to a legal case. I had to document every last little thing because I needed to make sure that if I said something, it was true. or if I recommended that they say something, it was true. So that was one of the issues that we're dealing with. And American intelligence and Allied intelligence, all Five Eyes intelligence, we all had the same worry. And there was a strong belief that 9/11 had, that the people doing it, the initial belief was this was Saddam Hussein. This was not, we didn't buy it that it was Osama bin Laden. And when they said it was, I still didn't believe it for probably 3 weeks or a month after that. I thought it couldn't possibly be Osama bin Laden. He doesn't have that much capability.
Yeah.
I was wrong. But so there was that belief that Saddam Hussein had at least aided and abetted them. So it wasn't just, let's clean up the rest of the debris. It was, we think he was responsible. And by the way, he's costing us all this money, $1 billion a month anyway. So as long as we're over there, let's clean this up. Thought he was.
Yeah.
There was a group called Gulf 2000. Gary Sick administered it. It was just an email information board thing, the bulletin board, internet-based. And every Middle East professor and intelligence analyst and expert in America and Britain and much of Western Europe and a good part of the Middle East was on there. And the debates on the Gulf 2000 site over whether they were Iraqi or not Iraqi they went on for months. For about 1.5 years, we did not know for sure who they were.
Fast forward to, we went into Afghanistan in, I want to say November of 2001, boots on the ground, and then sent the 10th Mountain Division, so a large ground force in the winter, spring, February, March timeframe. Operation Anaconda happened, and we got into more deliberate, entrenched fighting in Afghanistan instead of just special operations forces. And then the summer of 2002, and me personally, I went from Korea to the Pentagon at this point. The summer of 2002, that's when the discussion started to enliven about weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein, and we need to do something about that. And that's when the Atomic Energy Commission was going in and pushing for inspections and trying to get him to verify that he didn't have anything. All the while he's talking about he's going to kill the great Satan. And
we will burn half of Israel. We will burn all of Israel. Remember that? It was a famous threat indicating a nuclear holocaust.
Yeah. So you're saying that he's talking about it. He's already shown a willingness to use weapons like that.
Yeah.
He doesn't care for human life one bit except for his own and maybe his son's. And when he's saying these things, you have to take it seriously, I think.
And beyond that, again, I was reading the intelligence reports then. And I hope I'm not disclosing something that hasn't been declassified. I think enough time has gone by that I don't have to worry about it. But the intelligence reports, we had signals intelligence of Iraqi commanders briefing Saddam Hussein and telling him, we have perfected a nuclear weapon. We are ready to test it. We know it works. It's ready to go. We should test it over Israel. We should not do it in the desert. Let's just have
Let's make it worth its while.
And they were briefing him all along. We're right there. We're on the brink. We're going to have it any minute now, any day now. We're weeks away. We're 2 months away. We're 2 weeks away. And we realized years later that they were telling him this because they would get killed if they told him, no, we haven't made progress. He would kill the messenger. He would kill the operators if they couldn't meet some sort of milestone. They were telling him that they were meeting the milestones. And after he got these briefings, he would stand up and make those public pronouncements. He wasn't making them based solely on having indigestion. Yeah. He was making them based on intelligence briefings that he had received, that we had intercepted. We believed that he had weapons of mass destruction because Saddam Hussein believed that he had weapons of mass destruction. That's the part of the story that nobody talks about, and I don't understand why not.
And part of the discussion, because this came up later on also, that I think the general public doesn't understand is that from a classification perspective, you have nuclear weapons, but chemical biological weapons are also considered weapons of mass destruction. Right. And so you lump them all together. He had already demonstrated that he had chemical weapons. Right. We already knew that. And what happened to him, there's no question in my mind that he had chemical weapons. And so we knew that, and he was saying that he was willing to use them, he was going to use them against us and our allies. Those are pretty big threats that had to be taken seriously. Now, I wanted to ask you something about confirmation bias as we get closer to the end here. Saddam Hussein attempted to assassinate George Bush, and I can't remember when that was.
It was in Kuwait. It was before I got there. I was in Yemen. After the Bush presidency, the Kuwaitis brought Bush and James Baker and pretty much the whole national security team over for a huge thank you mission. And that would have been early 93.
Okay.
I got there in August of 93, and it had just happened. And the Iraqis had rigged an SUV and put explosives, a C4 or something similar, inside the frame. The frame of an automobile is built out of hollow steel, like a steel girder.
It filled it
with C4. And they had a remote detonation device. And the Kuwaitis had discovered it. The Americans had not discovered it. It was the Kuwaitis that discovered it. And it was actually almost by accident that we found out about it. A Kuwaiti security force commander mentioned it to one of our government's security officials, thinking that he already knew about it. And when we started asking questions, he took him and he showed where it was. They had the people who had done it. And it was a very clever attempt. And I don't remember how the Kuwaitis had discovered it, but it seems to me that they said that was almost by accident.
But you look at that, and you look at all of Saddam's rhetoric, you look at the fact that he invaded Kuwait, that he had gassed his own people, gassed the Iranians. So here's a lunatic with weapons, and then you fast forward to 20, and he's somebody who attempted to assassinate a former U.S. president. Is there anything he won't do?
No.
Is a question you have to ask yourself. And I look at the Bush presidency, the second Bush presidency, what was his commander's intent? And there's no question in my mind there was some confirmation bias of, yes, this is a lunatic. He must have nuclear weapons. This must be true because the way he's talked and all the data that we've gathered. But I look at that, I think there was some confirmation bias of they found what they were looking for in intelligence, but it wasn't that hard to find what they were looking for because it was clear. It was hard to not find it. So you can criticize them of confirmation bias, but it was hard to come to any other conclusion, in my opinion, on that. So then you go forward and we invade, and the question I've asked for many years is we look back on that 2003 invasion, and overall it has not gone great in Iraq. Iraq is not a beautiful, blooming nation with freedom breaking out everywhere. There's terrorist cells all over it. So there are some major challenges there. And a lot of people call it a major failure. That number one, we didn't find weapons of mass destruction. And number two, we haven't tamed the beast. We haven't done that. But no longer there. And Iraq as a nation is not the threat that it used to be. And we could argue about what that looked like. But I think Bush's goal, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Bush's goal was to rid the Middle East of a lunatic who had weapons of mass destruction. And even if they had not perfected the nuclear weapon at that time, my guess is they were going to keep. So if they weren't a problem from a nuclear perspective then, eventually they would have been.
Yeah, I need to back up again because we glossed over the biological weapons. We mentioned them, but we were also convinced, absolutely convinced, that he had working biological weapons. And we thought that those could be anthrax, similar things, Ebola, that he had managed to weaponize that and atomize it so that it would be a mist that would be inhaled and it would disable masses of troops or of civilian populations. And you just put your finger on the real problem. It wasn't just the issue of did he have it yet. It was he was never going to stop trying until he got there. And at what point do you step in? Do you wait like we had to with Iran a couple of months ago till they were on the brink of nuclear breakout? Or if you wait another couple of weeks until they test it, then you're dealing with North Korea, who now has over 100 functioning nuclear weapons. When they are taking out Iran's nuclear capability, a huge part of their effort is always focused on the scientists and the engineers. If you can kill the guy who has the knowledge,
They got to start from scratch.
they have to start from scratch. Saddam Hussein, with all of his efforts, even if they never went anywhere, was developing a cadre, a core of people that were developing that knowledge. And they could have taken that knowledge to North Korea or to Pakistan or to some rogue state or rogue actor, anybody with money, and use that. So it was proliferation, whether he actually succeeded or not. He was contributing to nuclear proliferation by training these dozens or hundreds of people in that discipline.
So we invade Iraq, and we all know what happened there. I've already talked about that. And you can focus on all the negative. And I was not a big fan of it. I'll be honest, I was not a big fan of it. I did at the time think, we got to fish or cut bait. We have to change something in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But I still wasn't a big fan of it. What was the boss's intent? And the boss's intent was, and you were there, was to get rid of a lunatic with weapons of mass destruction.
That's right.
And to shut that down. I wish that they had thought more about phase 4 operations, meaning that after you defeat a nation, how do you handle it? How do you manage that? I don't feel like that was, but that's a different discussion. That's a different topic. Not everything out of Iraq has been terrible. And my wife and I, we had 2 young girls in 2016 who came and stayed with us for the summertime. They were exchange students. One was a Kurdish girl who is now a doctor. The other one was a young girl from Baghdad, and their lives are dramatically different than they would have been had that happened. Now, there are a lot of people whose lives are dramatically different in a negative way, but some good has come out of that. But you have to focus on, for me, as I analyze it from a decision-making perspective, was Bush completely right? And was Bush's administration completely right? Not completely right, but they accomplished what they set out to do, which was rid the world of a lunatic who had and was developing weapons of mass destruction.
That's right. Their mission was to remove Saddam Hussein. Now, there were those in the administration who had assigned to themselves a second mission to democratize Iraq. And that's where things went off the rails. Iran stepped in and said, oh, this is something that depends on the will of the people as expressed in a vote. And by the way, the biggest mass of people who were most untouched by the wars were the Iraqi Shia, and they're going to respond to us. And so they're the majority, or at least the plurality of Iraqis, not a majority, but a strong plurality. Yeah. And so they've been running Iraq. And yes, Iraq has been chaotic. I judged very harshly the attempts of the Bush administration after the war. I was fully in support of going to war and removing Saddam Hussein. I have friends who just think I'm terrible because I say, yes, it was the right thing for us to do. Yeah, it was a foreign country, but it was our business, and we are the world's policemen sometimes, and sometimes a cop has to go and do something. I know that's not a popular opinion anymore, especially not among what I consider to be my people, the Trump people. I know this isn't political, but I'm a Trump guy, and I like the idea of America first, and I like the idea of pulling back. But the intervention itself was a good and necessary thing to rid the world of a terrible evil. Yeah. The fact that it was replaced by chaos is regrettable, but I believe that the chaos post-Saddam continuing to today is still preferable to the strict order that came from an absolute dictatorship.
Brutal dictator. I've read a lot of things about how his sons were, and it was
horrible.
But you can't judge. You think if everything consequential action afterwards doesn't turn out well, then it was the wrong decision. That's not the case, because at every step, the next leader gets a vote. The enemy gets a vote. It's impossible to always look at second, third, fourth order effects when you're dealing with a really complex challenge. You go, what does winning look like today?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I solve this today? You can't really fuss about. You would like to be able to solve everything and develop that world with rainbows and unicorns for the next 50 years, but it never seems to work out that way.
No, it doesn't. And you mentioned Kurdistan. For the Kurds, removing Saddam Hussein was an unalloyed good. They are not affected by the chaos in Baghdad, at least not much. And they are showing that they are indeed capable of governing themselves. I hope that we see an independent Kurdistan someday. I hope we don't have to wait too long for it. The Kurds are a completely different set of people. They're different ethnically. They have a different language. They have a different self-image. And they are, the Kurdish Peshmerga are really the only army in that entire region that doesn't run away from a fight. They will stand and fight, and they'll fight to the death. Even their women will stand and fight to the death, and they don't run away. All the other armies there run away when they get shot at, but not the Peshmerga. They have more freedom of the press. They have more religious freedom. There are Christian congregations that are allowed to operate in Kurdistan that are not allowed in the rest of Iraq. It is a thriving, they have a thriving economy. It's a thriving part of the world. And that would never have happened with Saddam Hussein in power. So life for them is immeasurably better.
Yeah. And getting back to this as we wrap, I think of what Bush's intent was and what he accomplished, and then all the criticism. And you've heard it before, Bush lied, people died, and you want everything to work out. But I always ask myself, if you were sitting in his seat, what would you have done? And that's really the intent of this show, is I want people to ask, if you were in that seat, what would you have done? Because you're presented not good options. I don't care what direction you go, you're presented with not good options. You're presented with challenging decisions, and you have to make what's the best decision for, yes, going forward as much as you can, but really for right now, what is the best decision for right now? And I didn't always think this way, but I've come to believe that was the best decision for right then. It was the best decision for our nation, best decision for a lot of people. I'm glad that he made that decision, and there was a clarity in that decision. Even though it didn't come out in the press, and nobody really, it was not, part of it was because of the nature of intelligence and how it gets shared and how it doesn't get shared. But I felt like for what he was trying to do for the Middle East, he made the right decision. Confirmation bias included, whatever affected his decision, it was the right decision.
And, you know, that Bush lied, people died, caught on because it's short and pithy and it rhymes and it's easy to chant, but it is so dead 100% wrong.
Yeah.
Bush told the truth as he understood it. When Colin Powell gave that incredibly moving speech to the UN, he was telling the truth, or at least what he believed was the truth. It was all based on the intelligence that we were getting at the time. We believed it because Saddam Hussein believed it. Everybody believed it. Every single intelligence agency in the world believed it. When it turned out to be wrong, nobody wanted to admit, oh yeah, we got that wrong. And so they just tried to sweep it under the rug and stand up, own that you were wrong, and then people will trust you in the future. Now nobody really knows. If you say the CIA said that, I guarantee you there are 3,000 people watching this right now saying, oh yeah, the CIA. Nobody believes
the CIA also drug kids on the streets of Louisiana. And
people have lost faith in the CIA is because they tried to cover up their mistakes.
Yeah.
They tried to, and because they became very politicized in later years. But no, if I were sitting in that seat, I absolutely would have made the same decision. I would have made different decisions regarding the aftermath, but that's not part of our topic today. He chose the best possible option, and he carried it out, he executed it, and he achieved his goal. Saddam Hussein was gone. and he was no longer there, changing the policy, the foreign and domestic policy of every Arab and Islamic country in the world. It wasn't just about Iraq. It was about the whole Organization of Islamic Conference, the Arab League. All of them were affected by Saddam Hussein. And every single Arab leader urged us to get rid of him. They were all angry at us for not having removed him in 1991.
I love the discussion. I love the analysis of it. We're here so that people can make better decisions to get better results. We named the show Commander's Intent for that specific purpose, so that people can focus on what their objectives are, what they're trying to do, and then make decisions based on those objectives, and cut out all the noise, cut out all the garbage that fills all of our lives, and focus on, am I doing what I'm setting out to do? So I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us today. And if you have not already done so, subscribe to Commander's Intent, and we'll see you the next time.
Thank you.
So that's it for today's episode of Commander's Intent Podcast. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you listen and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will be entered in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 private exclusive leadership coaching package with Derek Oakes himself. So head on over to commandersintentpodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Derek's leadership guide and join us on the next episode.